it doesn't, but what's actually happening is the discrepancy and the lack of legal foundation is causing the problems in the first place. And therefore, I think if we don't address it, if not in the way in which some of us are proposing, because we're all trying to do the same thing, then I think the Minister has to come back with something a lot firmer to address it, because decisions are being made by companies which are taking money, which are healthy companies. I think the ESB was an example of it, where it was quite clear they could have stepped up to the mark. Thankfully, they have now decided to do that. But we had the country on a standstill in anticipation of whether that would be sorted out or not. There are currently about 15,000 members of the airport pension schemes, again, who are similarly affected by some of these issues. So I do think that because of Pensions Board adjudications already, because of High Court rulings in relation to this matter being a contingent liability, that it's a case of introducing legislation now to bring that into stream. Because if we don't do that, who's going to foot the bill? Well, the pensioners, which is not acceptable, or the members of the scheme, or the state. And I think it is, as Deputy O'Snuddick said, will just pave the way for an opening up of more Waterford, Wedgwoods, EMI type cases, which nobody wants, whereas in reality it should be an opportunity to sort out the grey area.
Just to say, again, I understand Deputy Daly saying she wants a deterrent. I think the difficult issue is, will the deterrent incentivise companies to close their pension scheme? That's the problem. And I think, Deputy Daly, you have to be conscious of that. Now, you made a reference to a couple of commercial state bodies, but they're less likely to wind up. And by the way, can I just say in relation to the SB, I made it very, very clear at the beginning that in terms of pensions legislation and the Pension Board, the SB scheme is a defined benefit scheme. That was said right from the very beginning. The issue that people had was, what if the scheme closed tomorrow? Well, what if Ireland closes down tomorrow? Clearly, in a catastrophic situation where all of the risks and all of the liabilities crystallise tomorrow, well, in fact, not just in terms of pension schemes, but in relation to lots of things, there are lots of promises which would not be able to be filled. But we were very clear that the SB scheme is a defined benefit scheme. You're talking about it being part of the contract of employment and that employers entered voluntarily. And I think it is important that you recognise that employers entered voluntarily. There's lots of employers who've never set up a pension scheme. So when you have, if you like, good employers who did make those promises as part of their contract, they did run into the problems that people taking from the pension scheme, living much longer, obviously the contributions they made during their lifetime of working reflected what was considered appropriate at a much earlier point in terms of funding the scheme for the longevity required. But secondly, the schemes, and this is a major issue all across the world, the schemes' returns have been extremely disappointing. But going back to the ESB, for the last 2 years, the ESB's returns have in fact been extremely impressive. And hopefully that will continue, and the deficiency in the scheme, as is expected by the Pension Board, will be addressed via the agreement that the scheme made with the Pensions Board. So, you know, on balance, I think it's imprudent in terms of Irish law to seek to impose a direct employer liability. But as I say, I appreciate the sentiments that are being expressed. I think that proper regulation, so that schemes actually invest in ways that provide the returns sufficient to meet the promises that have been made. That's the critical thing to do. But we will keep this under constant review, as well as looking at the situation of people in the DC schemes, many of whom who operate on their own in a context where it's very difficult in a small fund to call the market for 30 years hence into your retirement. In fact, you need to be a very lucky investor, as Deputy OD will know.